Welcome to First Answers. This is episode 16 in the series, Parent Leadership for 21st-Century Children. Adolescent children face significant challenges that can be harmful to them or prepare them for success. Their success may even depend on what you do. Learn about the milestones of growth for teens so you can see the progress your children are making and learn how to help them. It takes more time and effort to solve problems than it does to prevent them. Visit firstanswers.com to find more about the podcast and tons of resources for families and mental health.
At the beginning of this episode about parent leadership for 21st century children, I'd like to remind you that it's based on the notion that instead of having a standard management plan or a set of practices that are appropriate for every age, or appropriate for every location and time where your family is, that it's best to come up with a form of parental leadership that has adaptability in it, that allows you and that motivates you to make a few adjustments as you go along. The simplest idea, of course, and the most familiar is when your children grow older, you want to relax a rule or two and increase the quality of your relationship, so that you don't go through adolescence into adulthood and still carrying out a set of rules. I'm going to repeat a story I've told before, but it is such a good story. When I was in my class at Brigham Young University, I was teaching about the need to make adjustments, and this fellow raised his hand and said, the other day I did something my dad didn't like, and so he told me that I couldn't make use of my car. And then he said, I'm 24 years old, and the whole class laughed. And then he also said, and I'm married. And to make sure that he wasn't just putting us all on, I said, come on, is that true? And he said, that's true. And it's a wonderful example of a father, for example, not adjusting to the age or the emotional and level of maturity of his child. In addition to that, I am stating emphatically as I can, the necessity for us to adapt ourselves to the conditions that our children face, which are quite different than those we faced growing up, and they're more predatory and potentially harmful to our kids. And unless we do so well and thoroughly, then we create risks for our children that prevent a strong growth trend and an opportunity for them to achieve success. Now, for those of you who think that this is something that probably doesn't apply to you, I would like to say to you that as a person in a clinical practice and have been for years, I can tell you that the conditions that our children are facing are getting more difficult, more challenging, more complex, and more confusing. And this confusion surrounds things like gender identity, moral behavior, the value of education, and things that tend to really matter to most parents. So in episode 16, in Parent Leadership for 21st Century Children, I am proposing that during the years 12 through 18, you adopt a parental approach to your children that is firm, that is flexible, that is conversant or oriented toward relationships, and also is accountable, both for you and for your children. Now, the purpose for that is that appears to be a good match of where you need to be firm and have boundaries for kids, but at the same time, you allow yourself some flexibility based on the interesting types of situations they face and the differences among your children. As part of this, I am proposing that the most valuable information for you to have is the information you gather on a regular basis from your children to see what they're thinking and feeling and doing and who their friends are and all that. But besides that, what is the most crucial is to understand the developmental tasks for adolescent children and then learn how you can help them be successful. Now, I'd like to also remind you that the words developmental tasks mean that children are trying to become competent at some things and they're trying to complete the biological origins so they complete every single genetic possibility that is available to them. So you have both of these kinds of tasks going on. And I remind you that the primary reason for getting well acquainted with the developmental milestones of each period of your children's lives is to acquaint yourself with healthy measures of your children's progress. We have sometimes so many apprehensions and worries about our kids. I have told this story about this woman after a conference came and said, I would like to ask you a question. I said, I'll try to answer it. And she said, what do you do when your children start using drugs? It wasn't if, it was the idea that her children are going to, and she wanted to have some suggestion about how to respond to that. Well, that isn't the most important information for us. The most important information is to have some idea of what it means when children succeed, not just with the things we emphasize that we value, like the valued outcomes of sports or education or something. We want them to developmentally be healthy and strong and capable in at least 5 areas. The following forms of development, if they show evidence of successful progress, they'll appear as children grow through the 6 years of 12 through 18 and be mostly complete by the end of this period of time. It's also the case, as you know, there are late developers and some move on into early 20s. Now also please note that children develop these qualities and experiences at different rates. Some are early, some are sort of in the median, and some are way past 18. So that'll require you to understand how to make adjustments for them. A tall, willowy shaped girl, for example, might have certain qualities that she's happy about and some that she doesn't. And a boy who is a late developer during this period of time will have to decide what else to do besides playing football or basketball if his body hasn't matured on time. So we all make those adjustments, and then I'm going to describe to you several qualities inside each form of development so that you can look carefully at it and say, okay, my children are reaching these and I can see them, and therefore they are succeeding and so am I. And then you also want to be able to say, now, what could I do to help them develop and make progress and even maybe exceed what they might otherwise if you didn't help them? So let's take a look at physical development. Now, I know you know these as body and so on, but here are some things that you should know. They should go through puberty, which is the development, healthy development of secondary sexual characteristics. They should understand about sex and the nature of it. And they also should understand about how to link their sexual desires to self-control and so on. Now, females start approximately 9 months to a year before males. And each gender follows a fairly consistent sequence of physical changes until puberty is concluded. We can see, for example, the body size and shape changes from less maturity to maturity. A growth surge may occur, and children become much more aware of their appearance. This is a period of time when 14-year-old boys spend time in front of the mirror flexing or checking the whiskers at the side of their mouth to see if things are coming along well. Girls are spending more time doing makeup, etc. Now, in addition to that, healthy development requires that they regulate increased sexual motivation. Now, a lot of parents don't get involved with their children in this regard, and they should, in my opinion. They just sort of think, well, okay, we'll have our birds and bees talk, and that should do it. Not so. There are all sorts of things that are important for you to be able to say. What does a girl do, for example, if in high school some boy takes it upon himself to put his arm around her, or to touch her going down the hall, or do stuff like this, which adolescent boys often do? So you think, well, how do I help my daughter prepare for that? Well, you should tell her about it and ask her what it means, and ask her to not interpret that particularly as he finds her attractive. There are other things that it means, and she should know about those. So this is usually shown by increased awareness of how one looks to other people and the need for acceptance and so on. Please remind yourself that the body is the core part of development here. And so whatever happens to the body influences every other form of development. So if we're having growth and we're talking about development, then understand that mature individuals can regulate their sexual impulses and gauge the display of sexual behavior to the conditions of love and commitment and responsibility. Okay, now, sexual desire, the legitimate sexual desire has started for boys and girls long before puberty. The average age is about 10, which means that you should be closely watching your kids in terms of how much sexual content they can find on the internet, because now we're seeing addictions to pornography very early for both boys and more girls, and we're having advanced forms of that in terms of what everybody knows as sexting. And if you don't know what that means, please consider that you have people disrobing in front of each other on the internet. That's the safest way for me to say it. So therefore, it is important for parents to communicate often and prepare children to manage situations where sex is clearly involved, so you can communicate and punish less. It's also true that adolescent kids need to adjust to physical abilities and limitations. They need to also understand how to find and appreciate desire for adult acceptance. Increased physical stature increases motivation to be accepted and treated like adults. It's a big time deal for a lot of kids. They also go through what is called an establishment of a gender identity, and this is the period of time that individuals start to apply the information they've acquired about themselves that is used in a form of gender concept of adequate masculinity or femininity. And since there are a lot of confusing things going on in families and in society, we have increasing numbers of kids who have gender dysphoria experiences and are coming out with same-sex attraction. In the last decade alone, the number of individuals coming out with same-sex attraction has almost doubled, which suggests that it's not just genetic, that there are other learning experiences which have not occurred or which should occur in order for them to have a healthy ability to be masculine or feminine. It is also true during this period of time that they need to understand that achievement is based on a healthy body, and they need to maintain. In our high schools, for example, we have large numbers of adolescents who are overworking, working a job, taking a lot of school so they can go to college, for example, and they don't take care of their health. It is still true that kids need from 8 to 10 hours of sleep a night, and they need 3 meals a day, and they need to learn to take charge of their life. So let's go on to mental development. And this is the mental development from ages 12 through 18. Here's what happens. A unique style of thinking. Adolescent children progress through a unique style of thinking that demonstrate their likes and dislikes, and they come up with what is called a theory of mind. It's how they think and how they understand the world. One little insert I'd like to make is there's huge evidence that the more children know about the way their brain works, the more motivated they are to study, do homework, and perform well in school. Secondly, you should know about formalized reasoning. Children demonstrate and organize the ability to think in sequences, to solve problems, to create new ideas, to make decisions, for example. So teach them a problem-solving strategy, like identifying the problem, thinking of alternatives, testing the options. A simple one that says, here, try this out, and this is how you help make good decisions for your kids. Now, what do I mean by a theory of mind? Well, during adolescence, children can use their minds to understand things they cannot see, touch, taste, or hear. They can understand abstract ideas, are among life's most important. They include forming a deeper understanding of things like love and ethics and integrity. All of these things are open to kids and should be talked about. If you are not identifying some of these concepts, like integrity or ethics and political philosophies and so on, I wish you would, because getting your kids to talk about them and learn about them will improve the quality of your relationship and help you in a lot of ways. Then lastly, in terms of mental development, I just want to focus on the fact that they make more decisions than they did during childhood, and that the decisions that children make during 12 through 18, they last a long time. Some of them last a lifetime. And so it is important for you to make sure your kids know how to decide well and have values which are associated with their judgments. Now I'd like to go on to social development. Well, what do they learn, or what do you see happening during this period of time? Well, they could learn to be an effective communicator if you're willing to help them. They have the mental abilities typically to succeed at this, but sometimes shyness lasts past childhood. Sometimes they've been embarrassed or insecure about something. So communicate to them that you understand them and invite them to learn how to do the same by understanding more about others before judgments are made. It's a simple decision. Before you judge, understand. And you keep doing that until they catch on to the idea that they've got to ask questions to learn. And then they need positive talking and listening skills where they learn to praise and encourage and see the good in other people. They can also learn acquaintance skills, meeting people, talking with them, how to get acquainted with them, and so on. Cannot tell you the number of kids who do not have these skills and who live with anxiety and some forms of depression, and all they need in some cases is the ability to have confidence, to say hello, to ask questions, to give compliments, and do those things. All of these things you could teach your kids. In terms of social development, they also need a mature form of what is called person perception and tolerance. Successful personal perception is the ability to be aware of and communicate about oneself, other people, and the nature of relationships. Think about that for a minute. A relationship means that you have to take into account at least two people, you and the other person. Well, some kids enter, if they're anxious or if they're arrogant, they enter and go through adolescence as if they are the center of the universe. And it's not healthy for them or for others. And it's important for them to begin to understand that person perception helps them see the good in people, helps them see themselves in other people, and this leads to wonderful things like compassion and empathy and so forth. Now let's go on to social reasoning. Social reasoning has to do with understanding inferences or impressions or intuitions to understand the social context. It takes more time than I have here, but I will tell you what it means. Life is made up of a bunch of social contexts or situations, and they have to do with as simple as riding on an elevator with people, having a meal time with the family, or on a date with a girl, whatever. And one way of helping your children is to take a list of the 10 most common situations they participate in, classroom, at school, and so on, and teach them how to be successful. I recently had an example of that. I have a young man who does some yard work for me in the summer, and one day I was talking to him and asking him what ideas he had about the importance of work, and he said, well, my dad said that all employers look for effort and respect. And I thought, wow, listen to that language. My dad said, and then he said, he's talking about work, how you go about work. And he was like that. He actually carried that out. He's a wonderful worker and a wonderful young man. But think about what it would mean if you said on a date, here are things, in a classroom, here are things. You give them some idea about how to be successful in all of these situations. It's also important to have social confidence. It just simply means to be confident about your own behavior, less worried about what other people do. Well, how do you help them do that? Well, it comes from a willingness to take a few social risks, to communicate, to speak in front of people, and offer opinions. Help your children learn to do it first in your family, and then understand that they're going to go out and take advantage of opportunities elsewhere. It's really important that they develop social confidence so they're successful in the world we live in, where children are having a difficult time mastering the next part of social development. It has to do with the experience and formation of intimacy. Well, what does that mean? Well, we're not talking about sexual intimacy here. We're talking about discovering the experience of emotional intimacy with another person. It's like the first bloom of love between a boy and a girl, or close friends. And this happens with same-sex friends and later in heterosexual dating. And this is shown, of course, by long, deep conversations, affection, genuine caring, and so on. Mature individuals participate in intimate relationships, but they also retain a sense of autonomy. That will be a challenge for kids. Some will get intimate with others and lose their sense of self, and others will have so much control that they'll try to deal with people like that. Girls, for example, will often form little cliques, social cliques, where the group of them will get together and they'll exclude everybody else. And those are damaging to the people in it and the people outside of it. Okay, now let me move on to emotional development. Let me just insert here a reminder that the reason why I'm reviewing these is so that you can see them as milestones and look at your children and say, well, I've got a child that's 15. Is he doing this stuff, or is she? And can I see this happening in them? And there are ways for you to improve their abilities because, as by definition, a developmental task is partly learned, and they want to become competent, and their motivation to become competent will be a terrific motivation that you can use. Well, what about emotional development? Well, here are some things we want. We'd like to achieve gradually over time emotional independence. Adolescents acquire increased self-reliance, confidence, and security by learning how to regulate and create emotions themselves, rather than depending on others to do so, like, I've learned how to make myself happy, I've learned how to change a negative to a positive feeling, or I haven't been feeling good, so I decided to go jogging, or whatever. Emotional independence, so that they can gradually become independent from their parents and still love them and be in a close relationship with them. It's also true that emotional development leads to gender requirements. In our society, emotional requirements differ for men and women in some respects. Males have the developmental task of regulating their aggression and anger. These are adolescents. Females have the task of regulating their competitiveness and anxiety. Isn't that interesting? That's what the research clearly, consistently shows. Boys are working on aggression and anger, a lot of them, it's a general statement, and girls have to regulate their competitiveness and anxiety. Who would have guessed, except for a girl, that females typically are more competitive than males? Now, communicate with your children and carefully individualize them by gender when helping them understand and cope successfully with gender-related emotions. These are things that women might feel. This is what men might feel. It's all right for us to be different. I remind you that the differences between men and women are desirable, not bad or wrong. Doesn't make one better than the other. But the fact that they are different allows all of us, men and women, to grow and improve ourselves in order to understand and comprehend people in the other gender. Emotional development also includes readiness for commitment. How often do your kids make promises and keep them? And how important is it to them? And how important is it to you? Well, during this period of time, they should be ready to make promises and keep them and work at them. It takes a true awareness of feelings at the time the promise is made, and it requires the ability to regulate emotions when the time comes to honor the promise, because they might be doing something else. Well, how about this? How about balancing momentary desire with longer achievement? Sometimes adolescents will say, I want to do this, and it'll get in the road of passing a test that they need to pass, or so on. Well, during this period of time, adolescent children are faced with new achievement opportunities and challenges, and they also retain the emotional desires of earlier childhood. So they have to learn how to make choices and to balance between the two, the momentary desire of what they want to do then with longer achievement. It's a big developmental task, and when kids are successful at it, they have just laid a foundation for success at work and for college and so on. Lastly, under emotional development, we want to make sure that they have fun and enjoyment and that they form optimistic and positive attitudes. Hopefulness, faith, and optimism and belief in oneself are essential to a successful life. We're not talking about high self-esteem. We're talking about hoping for good things, religious faith, faith in God, or faith in themselves and other people. And adolescents who develop these positive attitudes have achieved a developmental milestone. Now, the last form of development I want to address is moral development. And we, in our society, want to address this highly significant of this day. There are some moral absolutes which are wrong or right, and teach children that, and do not allow them to buy into the idea that everybody has a personal truth, which is their personal impression. But in addition to that personal truth, that's not the end. That's not the standard. There are, in fact, laws or situations that are wrong and right. Abuse, exploitation, which injures and otherwise harming people, they're wrong, always wrong. And so you teach kids what those are and when there might be areas where they could be flexible. It is also important during this time, according to the situations they're in, to help children identify when their actions may help themselves or others or harm other people. Wouldn't you like your children to be aware of other people so that when a situation arises, they can think, no, I'm not doing that, it'll hurt me or it'll hurt those people. Or this will help me if I do this and nobody will harm if I do it. Think about that and start teaching your children about what helps and what harms themselves and other people. They also need to learn to appraise social situations, which I previously mentioned. And morality is more than a rule about some behavior. We want them to be able to look into a situation and see where there's risk and where there's opportunity. And we don't want them to be blind to risk in order to seek an opportunity. And we don't want them to be blind that if they do something like A, that'll hurt other people B. We also hope that children will develop a standard of personal integrity, and they will commit themselves to do that regardless of what other people think. All teenagers in our society, if they mingle with people, will have some idea about what the trends are, what the scripts are for kids, and they might be so excited about carrying out those scripts that they don't identify their own personal standard. Some researchers found that children, for example, girls, who had friends who were sexually experienced and talked about it, that these girls, even though they were not sexually experienced, were several times more likely to become experienced because they were mingling and talking with friends who talked about it. There are numerous opportunities where they're going to have to say, this is some form of integrity you're going to have to learn. You can apply it in terms of how much the internet is used, what kind of emotional and social behavior they engage in, and how they resist the temptations that are common to that age. Lastly, in regard to moral development, it is crucial that you help your children understand how they're connected to other people. I have been privileged, for example, to have experiences. On one occasion, I was traveling in Europe, and I went to Normandy, and I walked down on the beaches of Normandy. And I looked up at the hills that the American soldiers were facing at Omaha Beach. And I wondered what was going through the minds of those soldiers when they were approaching that. And I was overwhelmed when I got to the cemetery. My tears filled my eyes, and I began to feel so grateful for what they went through for all of the rest of us. So my wife and I began to save money, and a couple of years ago, we took our adult children and their spouses back to Normandy and took them through that place so they would see firsthand what some people have done for them. That has given them freedom and opportunity and all sorts of things. I think it is important that we teach of love and gratitude so that our children are grateful and express gratitude more than they typically do. Now, what to do in our families? Well, it's easy to say, difficult to do because of our schedules, but continue having family meetings, please. Be clear about what you bring into the family or allow in and what you screen out. It will teach your children what you value. Go out to wherever your children are as often as possible. Don't intrude unless they are at risk of being harmed, but learn about the people and other social conditions where your children are spending their time, including school, by the way. Learn to communicate love, warmth, and gratitude in your family more often than you typically do. You might do it a lot, and you might think, well, we already do it a lot. And I'm saying not one time in over 40 years of mental health professional practices, somebody said to me, we love each other too much, and we're too grateful in our family. Would you also identify the meaning of success? What do you want as success? Do you want children who have positive integrity, and or do you want somebody who's good at basketball? You can have both, but sometimes our efforts to create good basketball players or soccer players, for example, don't include the idea of being successful in other ways. Would you also please in your family develop a tradition of having children tell you about their experiences and to each other face-to-face in family settings? So when your adult children leave home and go away and come back, they will have a habit of saying, let's gather and bring each other up to date and tell what is going on. Next, don't delay. When you see a child struggle and it's repeated once, don't delay in finding out about it and get help. Most things do not take care of themselves, at least very quickly. And then lastly, it is important that you remember that it's the relationship. In the process, teach your children about trusting you and being trusted, being warm and accepting, and learn to communicate a lot and use those relationship skills in rearing adolescent kids. So what do? Well, enjoy this period of time, but think of it as a critical period where some of the things that are supposed to happen that lead to success will, and if they don't happen during this period of time, they may not occur at all. We should love our kids and support and encourage them, but we deserve to have a good time too.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the First Answers podcast, which is sponsored by firstanswers.com, where you can find new tools for families and parents of 21st century kids with a focus on emotional self-reliance. Find First Answers on Facebook and remember to subscribe to stay up to date with new episodes. Give us a rating and write a review on the podcast app or Google Podcasts and let us know what you think about First Answers. Check out another podcast by Dr. Scoresby called The Christ Questions, which is centered on questions we ask about Jesus Christ and questions he asks us. Dr. Scoresby examines how Christians can build faith in Jesus Christ that lasts and discover the true blessings and rewards for believing.